Hello, everybody, and thank you very much to our attendees this morning. And I guess more importantly, to our guest speaker, Dr. Robert New. So, Robert is from Swinburne University of Technology. I'm going to get him to introduce himself shortly. But I have learned a few things about you, Robert, that I didn't know before, which is that you
Oh,
have earned degrees in psychology,
yeah.
sociology, biology, education, and have done your PhD in researching educational leadership. That is a lot of stuff, Rob, I've got to say.
Yes, I think I'm up to 9 tertiary qualifications, 7 of which are
Wow.
university level. So yeah.
That is very, very impressive. So, Robert, today the idea is that we will speak for about 20-25 minutes, so we have some time for questions. Just in
Yep,
case we run out of time for questions, we will let the audience, if okay with you, do you mind if they contact you directly if they have any
that's
questions?
fine.
Would be
Yes.
great. And of course, we will record the event, so they will have a copy of this as well. But often we find we might run out of time and people like to follow up afterwards. So I've got a whole range of questions for you, which won't surprise you. But Robert, I'm going to start by asking if you could briefly introduce yourself, your role, and where you got introduced to Quitch would be great. So over to you, Robert.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. So yeah, I am a lecturer at Swinburne University. I lecture in the education department, and I'm also a course director for the Bachelor of Education Primary and the Early Childhood Primary degrees. And so yeah, got introduced to Quitch trying to remember how long ago, probably a bit over a year or maybe a year and a half ago, uh, through the university and attended some training on that and how to use it, and was then encouraged to give it a go in my courses. And even though we as a university strongly recommended that it being included in all first year level subjects, I thought it would be interesting to use it with some of the later years of the course. So that was, yeah, my sort of introduction to it. And then, yeah,
Yeah.
that was it. I think I even might have done the training with yourself.
I
So
have a feeling you might, Robert.
yeah,
We started off early on. So, Robert,
yep.
then can I ask a couple of things? Like, what prompted you as an so you talked about looking at teaching the students in the later years in terms of using Quitch, but what prompted you to look for a new approach to getting students to engage with the weekly readings in particular was of a lot of interest to the audience today and indeed to myself.
Yep. So what we find typically is that we might set weekly readings and we might discuss them in tutorials, but in our weekly tutorials. But also, what you do find in those tutorials is that a reasonable proportion of the class has not read them yet, and think that they can just gather all the important information from the tutorials, and they can gather some certainly, but it's actually far more productive for the students if they come to the tutorials with some understanding of
Mm.
from the readings. Then they can actually unpack their understanding and contribute to the class discussion rather than just having to listen to try to get a gist of what's going on. So we really wanted to look to how ways of getting students to actually do that basic sort of reading rather than just saving it to the week of the assignment being due. Um, because particularly in the subjects that I teach, so I teach two units. We're on unit convener. And so those ones are like assessment for primary and for the teaching technologies subjects. Now they are both jargon rich, concept based, principle based subjects where if you haven't grasped those concepts early, it actually really prevents you from developing a good understanding throughout the semester. And if you can pick up, some of the things, say, for example, around design thinking and why that's important, or in assessment, like understanding the different assessment types and their function and purposes is really, really crucial to understand early for success in the units. we really looked to sort of try ways of how can we get students to do it, and which was the answer that sort of sprang to mind. Um, the fact that it is you know instant feedback to the students as well if they get a question right or wrong. There's also the opportunity to provide things like hints for the answer as well to sort of prompt that kind of thing for students. And so we thought that would be a really good way of helping students engage with the readings early. And yeah, that's sort of um,
where you start. So
where
I
we
thought that
started.
was interesting in that if you said it was important for you the students were engaging with the readings earlier in the semester than rather than just before
Mm.
assessment. And I think you make an important point there, Rob, about the core concepts, the context. There's a lot of jargon. It's very content heavy for the students to pick up on that. So am I right in saying that you were uploading your readings into Quitch, and then the Quitch AI engine was creating those questions that you were pushing
Yes,
out to the students? Is that the way in which you were doing
it is.
the
So
reading? Yeah.
yes, so the way I used it was to use the AI to generate the questions as also a time saving thing, which
Absolutely.
we're all always
Yes.
looking for.
Time for.
But the advantage then also of being able to edit the questions, preview them, and or dismiss questions that
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
didn't think were particularly relevant was important. Uh, so, being able to actually sort of run that kind of, make sure that there is the human in the loop to actually, let's look at the output, let's see how it works, like if it functions, um, and that is picking up on the key things that I want students to understand from the readings. And for the most part, it did, but it also had the opportunity to add my own questions
Mhm.
to make sure that the understanding was there that I wanted the students to
Yeah.
be able to display. Um, what I then sort of also found was choosing the readings carefully became actually a thing that you, looked at rather than just going, that's a reading that I work. Uh, it works best with particular types of readings where there was either some kind of general discussion around the core concepts that worked really well, um, but the ones that didn't work as well from my perspective were the ones that were really technical studies about whether things were tested, and it would ask questions like what percentage did this or that sort of stuff, which wasn't really what I was wanting the students to sort of understand it. What I wanted to know is, are they getting the main sort of concept? So that became an interesting thing of how to sort of choose the readings to put in, and actually then had the positive follow-on effect of, well, why am I setting these really technical readings for students when I want them to engage with like the bigger ideas and theories, and actually helped having that sort of further impact around refining reading lists for students, which was
Yeah, which is an interesting point itself. So that was Rob, because one of the things we like in Quitch is those analytics that you're getting fed back and
yeah,
so on, and again in real time. So that's good. You were able to make those adjustments based on I guess, real time data you were
yes.
collecting around student needs, which is what we always want to focus on.
Yes, yeah. So
Yeah.
it wasn't like so in some case, like I was able to then obviously put that intervention in before stuff was even shown to the students or the reading list was presented to the students, which was beneficial too. But then there was also the really good data that came out from the quizzes that we did set. So
Mm. Great, awesome. I'm going to move on to integration,
yep,
in terms of again sharing with your insights to the audience. So, Robert, how did you incorporate Quitch into your existing unit structure, alongside the curriculum rewrite that you were doing?
yep, yes. So for the members of the audience who weren't aware, last year the government introduced the T Performs into education courses, the initial teacher education courses, which meant that we had to include a whole bunch of new content into our courses, or sort of coming in more accurately over the top of what we were teaching. And so that then provided an opportunity to rewrite curriculum. And so we were doing a curriculum rewrite anyway. One of the consequences of that was that we changed our assessments quite broadly, so that instead of having some subjects, had 4 or 5 assessments, so we made it all units in our degrees had 2 assessments worth 50% each, but then also a zero-weighted formative assessment task. And it was because that was then, standard across the board, that's where the Quitch quizzes became really useful as the formative task, to give that sort of early feedback, and to then be used to really, inform the what was then went on in things like the tutorials, for example. Um, yeah, and so it was then really easy to incorporate. It spoke to our learning management system, which is Canvas, and interacted there. So we were able to, get student lists, to talk from Canvas to Quitch really easily, and that was that, and then sort of show that tracking, send invites to the students, through
Mm-hmm.
those emails. So it was really easy to set up and use. Yeah.
Mm, great. Which, and you mentioned time saving before, which,
Yes.
as we all know as academics, is a huge thing for us. We're all very time poor. Robert, we touched on this a little before, but just maybe to give the audience more of an idea, how did you use Quitch's AI question generation to create quizzes tied to the readings, and what was that process like? Just so people get a flavour
So
of
the
how you
process
did
is really straightforward. So you have options in Quitch as to how you're going to generate the quiz. So you can do it where you upload pre-ones that you can upload an Excel file with your questions and your answers, or you can do what I did, which was to upload the reading that I was doing, so that the PDF of the reading, and then sort of say use the AI engine to generate questions to check for understanding. And you can also provide prompts of what sort of things you want the questions to sort of focus on as well. So that was also really useful to, because this is what we want the students to get out of this reading. And so then it came up with the list of questions. Typically, again, you could ask for quantity of, you typically sort of set 10 questions. And but then I might only keep 8 of them because I think, 2 were no good and have to reword a couple, but still very much faster than going through and yeah, creating the questions sort of manually.
from
Yeah,
scratch. Yeah,
yeah,
that takes a long
and
time. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And I do like Robert as well. And I think it's something you mentioned to me in which that you liked that ability to quality assure, if you like, everything. So you had the
yes,
ability to create the questions, but before they got published, you had the opportunity to edit,
yes,
delete, or leave them as they were created. But I agree with you. That's very important for all of us that we are checking what's created
yeah.
by the AI engine. And I think it's
So
one thing
that's
you
where
mentioned.
I feel like it's important to have the human in the loop.
Yeah,
That
that's a great way
that
to put it. That's exactly
yeah.
right. Let's make sure we keep the human in the
Yeah,
loop. I agree.
yeah.
And then my next question, Robert, following on from that is, how did the data around the question accuracy and completion inform the way you approach tutorials and class discussions with the students?
So what it showed me was areas of good understanding, but also areas where there were some gaps. Areas of good understanding would be a great way to then start a tutorial. So, something I know
Mhm.
the class is going to be strong in. So we can then start discussion around that where I know, and also give me names to sort of say, like, I know this person knows this stuff. So I know I can sort of call on them, and and everyone's going to look good in this process, which was good for engagement and good for students, willingness to contribute to class.
Yes,
Particularly
exactly. And
when
confidence, isn't it? Yeah,
yeah.
building their confidence.
But then also what it showed was occasionally some surprising results where almost like things which I would have assumed that they would have picked up by the 3rd or 4th year of their degree around, for example, types of assessment, which, you know, then, there was a question in one of the early readings that I set for my assessment class uh, around, you know, characteristics of formative assessment, which is something that is throughout the degree and is in all this, the individual unit subjects have assessment as one of their learning outcomes. But for some reason, it turned out like it was almost like it had been sort of assumed through. So there was a reasonable, not like it wasn't the majority of people, but there was a large group, where it seemed like they hadn't really grasped that yet, over their part of the course. So that then meant that I spent a bit of time in the tutorial going back over, here's the three main types of assessment, formative, summative, diagnostic, and here's the characteristics of each. Because I mean that's was absolutely crucial for the assignments in that unit. That understanding absolutely needed to be displayed because we're asking them to do like critical analysis between the different types and their strengths, limitations, barriers.
Mm.
So picking up on that early and being able to correct that early rather than sort of, in the waiting to sort of like week 5 when the assignments are due, something having everyone panic, being able to sort of like in week 2 kind of go, it seems like some people haven't quite grasped this. Like, so
Mm.
it may not apply to everyone, but let's just go through it again. Share what you do know, and let's just go through and really get this strong early. And it did. It helped engagement in class, helped the class discussion, and helped students then go on and succeed with the course.
Mm. I think, Robert, you make a really important point there. As educators, because something has been taught, or we believe it has, in previous
Yep.
semesters and previous years, we're assuming a certain level of knowledge. And you're
Yep.
right, like the majority, maybe most people got it, but there will always be a pool of people I find who missed those core concepts, and they're not going to be able to succeed unless they get them. But very often we don't know that as educators because we don't have that data in front of us, or we don't discover it until we're marking assignments, something at the end. And by then it's too late for
Yep.
students. So I love that you use the data to find out exactly what the problems were and then you address that. And I think you make some important points there about it was a great for engaging the group because people were able
Yep.
to talk about what they did know versus some of the others then could listen in about what they didn't know, but also the confidence building you mentioned,
Yes.
which also a
Um,
really important one.
yeah. Yeah. And it
Yeah.
also what it did was also give me the names of the students who like didn't necessarily
Mm,
have the understanding, and they're not the sort typically like particularly the ones who this applied to. They weren't the ones who would speak up in class. Like you'd
yeah.
say, you might ask the sort of question, have people got reasonable understanding of this? And you'd get, they would probably nod and say yes. But then when they did the Quitch quiz, it actually showed that they didn't. And so you're actually able to, you know,
Mm,
yes, then in
support.
the tutorial sort of kind of go, the student X has given the correct answer. So student Y, what do you think about what that person? So you can actually draw them in and kind of say, like, hey, that's what they just given you that knowledge that you have shown elsewhere that I'm not calling you out saying you haven't. I'm helping you to draw in that knowledge through like just some getting it the correct answer first and sort of making sure that you've
Yeah.
heard that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so yeah, it was getting in those sort of students who again might not otherwise normally contribute or normally express their lack of understanding in a
Mm,
tutorial that you are able to then still correct that uh, understanding without singling them out or putting them on the spot
correct.
or putting them in a place where they would get defensive or
Mm,
walls would go up. It was
yeah.
really you were able to do it in a kind of an organic, sort of friendly, psychologically safe way
Mm.
to keep them engaged in the class, and so that was very beneficial.
I think you've mentioned, Robert, there are a few things that I really like in terms of your approach. It's clearly very inclusive. So you're
Yes.
no, you yeah, and you're building up the students' confidence, you're building up their knowledge, but you're making sure that no one is being put down by in the way you're doing it. It's as you said, psychologically safe, which is very important because you're quite right. Students can get very defensive or very uncomfortable, and that's the last thing we want to happen in a learning environment. We want it to be very much a safe place to learn, ask all the questions you want, and but you clearly are very inclusive in the way you approach this as well. You're including all of the group, which I really like your approach there. There's quite a bit to learn from you, Robert. And the next area I'm going to move on to then is student experience and impact. So students were asking for quizzes even after you stopped providing them, you told me. And what do you think drove that level of engagement? Because this isn't something we see often.
Again, well, I think it was just the fact that they could sort of do it like it was a we might call an asynchronous activity, like effectively a homework sort of task for them, so they could do it at a time of their choosing.
Mm.
Um, when they were comfortable, they could, and so I think that helped. I think it also helps that the because the screening of the questions are done, they were relevant for the reading, but also relevant for the unit learning outcomes of the course. And so they were really clearly linked to what we were trying to achieve in the whole unit.
Mm.
And so, and because there was that connection, and also particularly these were readings then that we also kind of expected or wanted the students to then draw upon for their first major assignment. So it was all really, really targeted and structured so that this would really be sort of formative, but also then feed into assignment one and make assignment one much easier to start, much easier to understand. And so there was that, very careful planning and linking of it. And so when we then sort of said, after like they've done, I think by about week 4, week 5, we sort of stopped them. The students had found that they were getting benefit from it. They
Mm.
it was
Wonderful.
making them do the work that they often put off. And students recognized that. They recognized that they were actually doing the reading early, in these subjects, whereas in others they were like just waiting until later, and but also finding the benefit of it. So, you know, the fact that it is kind of uh, it's not a game as such, or it's not, but it is still gamified in that it's
Right. Right.
let's see how many questions I can get right, and also there's that instant feedback on here's what you went wrong, but here's what you might have missed, which
Yeah.
was also really useful for them too.
Mm.
So I think that drove engagement in the
Yeah.
activities, and so then when effectively that formative part was over because they were now working on assignment one, um, yeah, I think students then were sort of like, "Well, actually, I wouldn't mind doing a few more of those. So if you want to keep it
Right.
going,
Mm.
and so that's something we're looking at for this semester.
Yeah, and which is great. As you said, Rob, once you can see that the students are getting that benefit and stuff, it's very compelling and just it's exactly what we want. We want them to be able to engage. We want them asking for more rather than, you know, running away from us. Um, Robert, another question. Did you notice a difference in how students were contributing in tutorials since they were now engaging with the readings, say, from week one rather than waiting until just before the assessment?
Yes, so I think possibly already kind of covered some of that, but yes, they certainly students were able to actually have more involved conversations in the tutorials. So rather than having just one or two people kind of dominating the conversation, like
Yeah.
the ones who the more who've done the work, more people had done the work, so there were more voices being displayed in the class, and that was beneficial just in terms of actually getting like the depth of conversation and critical thinking, because rather than just having one or two voices, you actually had 4 or 5 or 6 or 7
Mm.
who were then going, actually, well, I thought this. And so that was then, and that's where you like really wonderful learning occurs when when it's that sort of peer based, and the peers are able to show like different perspectives, different ways of looking at it, or what they you know find different likes or dislikes around it, um, because that's then feeds into that sort of more critical thinking, more
Mm.
evaluative about
Mm.
how these concepts that are being sort of covered in the units I teach can be taught.
Yeah. Wonderful. Love it. Love it. I have one more question in this area, Robert, and it's Were there any improvements in assessment results you could attribute to that earlier readings engagement?
I think well I think the assessment averages were fairly sort of similar from before and after. What I would say is that there was a strong correlation between those who did the quizzes and engaged with them
Mm,
and the highest performing students.
mm,
And there was a strong correlation between those who did not do the Quitch quizzes and lower levels of
mm,
performance. Um, so I think those no, I didn't get 100% of people doing the quizzes. I had large classes, 60 students. So yeah, for one of them, and so yeah, you didn't get everyone doing it, but it also, yeah, that meant that you had data you could follow up on, like, and email the
correct.
student, why aren't you engaging, which was really useful. But also, it there was those who were doing it, and what was also, I think, really good was that uh, some of these students I taught in previous years, 'cause these were like third and fourth year out of a 4-year degree students, so I taught them earlier. But it was interesting how some of those students, particularly say uh, I don't want to cast aspersions, but yeah, sort of more middle performing
Mm,
students who
mm.
actually really engaged with this, I would say that their results sort of went up.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. Yeah.
the because they were had more time to sort of
Mm,
go through some of the key issues.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, so I think there was, yeah, definitely that correlation between, like, those with the highest engagement with Quitch, or higher levels of engagement and performance, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. I mean, I think anything where we can drive that earlier engagement without question in my mind makes a difference. And I know it from published papers, that I've
Mm.
both written and read on this as well. So we want to engage as early as possible.
Yeah,
So we're
it's that whole
also,
sort of,
yeah.
spaced recall kind of thing. If you want to look at
Yes,
that sort of
exactly.
research around, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely it makes a difference. Robert, we are almost out of time, but before I let you go, I have a couple of things on, I guess, reflection and advice. So, what advice would you give educators who are struggling to get students to engage with readings before class?
That's where I suppose, Quitch can be really useful for that. If you set it up and assign it, for prior to, or the for it to be done prior to the tutorial. Again, you can also track really easily who's doing it, who's not, and then contact those who are
Mm,
engaging, which can be good to then for obviously one of the issues at university level, obviously, is keeping students engaged with the course. But being able to sort of touch base early and kind of go, hey, I've noticed you haven't done these couple of tasks. How's it going? Anything I need to know or can help you with? Uh, those sort of simple things can really help to maintain student engagement
mm,
with the university. And I think it does also then help with this, because it is non-confrontational. It's something they do. It's not going to be public. It does help them engage with their reading and gives them a chance to sort of check their understanding prior to class. And a lot of students, if they have that, if they can actually sort of have come into class with that little bit extra confidence of, yes, I have understood this, versus I've read it, but I don't know,
yeah,
or I haven't read it. When they then come to class, it's a very different experience. So I think those that which was the majority of students, certainly engaged with the quizzes. They It really did
mm,
help them sort of to engage with readings and to see the benefit of it.
yeah.
And yeah, I even had like one student comment like, like, oh, why don't we do this for other units? Because there's one, I always leave the readings to the last minute, and they saw the
Oh,
benefit. They recognised it.
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, which is great. And obviously you did a very good job on planning that whole, curriculum for them. So finally, Robert, looking ahead, how are you planning to build on this in future semesters?
So what are really. refining the reading choice to make sure that so having that sort of link between the readings, and you know, cognitive load demanded of the reading sort of thing, so that they're not too over the top or too technical and too
Yeah.
specific. So they are covering, the concepts and the ideas that we really want and the language that we really want students to understand early. So really careful choice of that. And I've just done some work with colleagues from Swinburne Online around that, where we've really gone through like the reading list for the unit, reading by reading, and refined those choices. And you know, not coincidentally, they are also
Mm.
ones that feed really well into Quitch to generate good questions and good quizzes for the students.
Mm. Robert, can I say a huge thank you for joining us today? It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. We have run out of time, but the session will be recorded for the audience. We will share it with you. And please, as Robert said, feel free to follow up with any questions that you may have, anything you didn't get to ask today. But Robert, I just wanted to summarize. There's a few what I find really key points that you made here. You talked about the teaching technologies that we need to look out where there's a lot of content heavy material, a lot of jargon, where those core concepts we must make sure the students understand that. We might have thought they learned them earlier, but clearly we can see now with real-time data that they haven't, and that we're making sure we help them succeed in terms of using that data wisely to help those who have not quite got those concepts. You talked about the instant feedback, how important that is for your students, and as a result, they talked about feeling better prepared coming to class, and that the ability to save an awful lot of your time by creating the questions using the Quitch AI engine and then the QA around that. But one of the other, there was two other areas that you talked about I thought was really important about building confidence in your students. And you did that, Robert. You clearly are doing that in a very inclusive way, where no student is feeling left out, but you're allowing those who have the knowledge to share it, but then the others kind of really grasping that and having the opportunity to improve themselves. And feeling psychologically safe was a very important thing you talked about, and that the students could clearly see the benefit for themselves and getting that and asking for it in other units that have readings and so on. And you talked about it being wonderful learning occurred as a result, which is a beautiful phrase. And then it being non-confrontational, which I think is something we haven't talked about before, but I think is also a very important thing,
Mm.
that students feel safe. It's their own environment. The colleagues don't need to know how they're performing and so on. And if it takes me 10 times longer than you, Robert, to learn a concept, so be it, but I can keep going until I do master it. So, Robert, I think there's so much you have shared with us that it's very, very valuable for us all as academics. So thank you so very much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to catching up for another coffee soon.
Sounds wonderful. Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Bye now, and bye to the audience as well.